start again, start afresh.
So, hello and welcome back to an audience with for International Women's Day. I'm Jolie Chambers from the Cohesion team, and today I'm joined for an audience with Sofia Buncy, the Deputy Lieutenant for West Yorkshire. So thanks for joining me today, Sofia. I'll hand over to you for an introduction.
Thank you very much for the invite, Jolie. I'm really pleased to be here in my hometown of Kirklees and giving this interview to you today. As you know, I speak on a lot of platforms, especially within Bradford, where I work, and wider nationally. So it's a privilege and an honour to be here today, actually, because this is where my roots are and this is where I am. So my name is Sofia Buncy. You've rightly introduced myself as a Deputy Lieutenant for West Yorkshire, and that's a recent appointment, and it's very much an honour. I'm very privileged to take up that post for West Yorkshire and highlight some of the good practices that communities have developed and some of the great initiatives that go on here. Nationally, I am the coordinator for a project called Muslim Women in Prison Project. So I was the first researcher in the country 9 years ago to look at the experiences of Muslim women prisoners and also look at some of the inequalities they face coming through the criminal justice system. And since then, I've worked with my colleagues to pioneer a specialist re-entry hub in Bradford for Muslim prison leavers, and I've gone on and continued to research, really. So at the minute I'm on my fourth research. So that's a collaborative research with Sheffield Hallam and Leeds Beckett University, again looking at Muslim women and assistance. A lot of my work is still community development based, so I'm still actively work with young people as I did in the early part of my career, and I'm also an interfaith worker as well. So there's a pretty long introduction for you there.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, you definitely cover a lot of different areas. What sort of would you say sort of your greatest achievements that you feel like, is there like maybe just one, or there could be like a couple sort of?
So yeah, I think for me it'd be a couple. As I've said, the early part of my career started off in youth work, and I was actually based in Huddersfield in the Crossland Moor ward, and I think that was my first challenge of interacting with communities, and especially young people. And as you know, the wards are largely South Asian populated ward, and I remember first going into youth work and the concept of girls' youth clubs perhaps wasn't quite known in the community, and I remember even the word club was really stigmatized, and trying to recruit young women for this club that parents thought, well, what is it? Is it like a dancing club? What are you trying to do? So some of my early achievements were actually engaging young women in youth provision and helping sort of build the aspirations for them outside of the usual gendered norms and ideals that the families had for them. Actually, many of the young people that passed through it was a Pakistani Youth Forum, it was called at the time, and many of the young women that passed through there came to us with a certain outlook, and by the time they left us, a lot of them moved on to further education, employment, and I still see them to this day, and I'm so hugely proud of so many of them who went on and became teachers, doctors. They went into the legal field, and I think that's the strength of inspiring but also leading by example in communities, and also we did have a male provision as well, so it's brilliant just how you can divert young people who are from quite a stigmatized and deprived area, actually. So I think initially that was my youth work achievement. And then on another professional level, I think having increased the visibility around Muslim women prisoners' experiences, for me personally, that hasn't just been a job for me, it's actually been an active campaign and a calling, and it's something I'm extremely proud of, especially having been the first in my field, and that came with its own difficulties as well, as a Muslim woman going into a profession that perhaps wasn't deemed suitable for a Muslim woman to be working in a prison, and then going on and pioneering really good practices, and those practices being acknowledged on a national platform. For me, it's really honed in on my community development work, and as you've said in the introduction kindly, there's a lot of things we do work on, and as a worker you're always told to you know, don't take no for an answer, and never give a no either. Learn your craft, learn your trade, no matter how difficult or different it is. So I feel they're some of my achievements.
Sounds really good. And yeah, especially like the youth work, it's really rewarding, sort of seeing how people grow throughout a period of time. And
absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's sometimes a bit of a shame that, you know, the cuts in budgets to youth work as well, and a lot of that is getting lost now. But the difference that having a role model that's based within your communities, or somebody you can call on, the difference that makes to young people is so immense. And I often talk about that when we're talking about the criminal justice service, and actually what does a preventative space look like, and how do we divert young people away from ending up in the CGS if they do have, you know, somebody to bounce ideas off, somebody to talk to, somebody to give them some direction. And that's not necessarily always your parents or your peer group. You know, youth workers have played an immense role in that. So, you know, I've got some really fond memories of my time working with Kirklees Council at that point as well.
So, like your achievements do sound really good, but did you ever find any, like, you had any challenges, or sort of, you know, being a woman, did you face any sort of stereotypes like throughout your career and voluntary work?
Yeah, I think I did, perhaps in the majority of the field. So I remember even when I started out in youth work, I mean, some of the challenges are that, you know, stereotyping, and a lot of people think, you know, what, even within my own community, what does a youth worker do? Do you guys just play pool and come back home? So even that was within my own community, even though it was, you know, huge vast pieces of work that we were doing around voice and influence. And I remember taking young people across to Italy and Spain on you know, we went over to Italy on racism in Italian sport. We were helping create a handbook and really strong issue-based things. But I think some of the challenges were not just stereotypes within your own community, but wider as well, you know, especially when I was doing some youth engagement with some of the boys. They'd never actually seen a Muslim woman youth worker, both within Kirklees, but also I worked across in Brighouse for some time, which was a totally different audience to where I was working in Huddersfield. It was, you know, at 99% white working class estate, and they'd never seen a Muslim youth worker either. So, you know, there were some instances where I had to sort of challenge racism on that side as well, and them thinking, well, why do we have a Muslim woman working in an area like this? And how do you then mitigate that? How do you build relationships and have meaningful conversations? So I did find myself actually in two polar communities, really challenging people's perceptions and ideas, and learning how to, you know, build common ground with them. And then I went into the prison service after that. So that was a challenge in itself as well. Again, you know, there's issues of disproportionality and inequality in prisons. Again, you know, 93% of the workforce in prisons is people from a white background, even though when you look at certain estates like the young people's estate, 54% of young people in prisons are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. So as a Muslim woman, where, you know, perhaps it's not deemed suitable for you from within your community to go and work in a prison, to then go inside and learn a craft and learn a trade, you sort of stick out like a sore thumb sometimes, and people think, you know, what is it that you're doing here? What is it that you're attempting? And I went in with a research hat. You know, I was a researcher. I was attempting to make sense of some of the experiences of women going in, and again, it was a similar practice to the youth work, building common ground with some of the officers in the prison, trying to get them to understand the very complex cultural and sometimes religious backgrounds that these women come from. So I think it has been a challenge, and it's really been about me holding my ground while I'm there, and you know, being articulate enough to convey what I'm trying to do, but also being personable and building relationships with people on a human level, which has meant I feel that, you know, in the long term, yes, it may take a couple of months or a couple of years, but it's given certain levels of acceptance, but also as we've come up with you know, reports and knowledge base, it's developed respect with those that are in the service as well.
It sounds really good. Like, yeah, you're paving a way for other women and other people to sort of be more accepted, you know, like in where did you say 93% were from a white background, was it? Yeah. So It's really good to be able to make them changes and make people more aware and like accepting of others. So that's really good. Do you feel like things have changed over time then, from your experience? Do you think improving?
Yeah, I think that actually I've had to publicly sort of be a role model, a public role model for this project. So a lot of my activity is, usually as prison workers, what happens is, you're very much mindful of what you can and can't publicly project, and you keep your head down. But with this type of project, which is a campaign project, an equality project, I've had to very much be like a public figure for this. So there's a lot of public interviews I have to do. I speak about it quite openly on Twitter, on social media platforms. So I think what's happened over time is other women from, vast BAME communities, as well as the mainstream, have recognised and thought, oh, there's somebody here that's actively for the past 9 years campaigned on a cause, developed a knowledge base. And I guess you then become a role model for other women who are coming up from behind you, who then reach out and say, can you tell us a little bit more about this profession? We'd like to get involved. What were some of your good experiences? What are some of the challenges? And I think that's when you think, oh, it's actually made a difference, because there was a time, 9 years ago, when nobody would have ever thought about going into this profession or, wanting to work in a prison. But because of what we've written around this and the films we've made about this and what we've articulated, people are actually considering it as a profession, and that representation within those professions is so important in order for the system to change.
Yeah, so I guess sort of going forward, how would you like things to in Kirklees improve for gender equality? Is there any way you think that we could take a step forward to improve things?
I think with a lot of the projects that I've worked on, whether it is, youth work, interfaith, the prison work, I've always found that empowerment begins at a grassroots level. So, for Kirklees to work with those communities at a grassroots level, and find out what some of the dynamics at that level are. What are some of the barriers to women, for example, accessing opportunities, the overt barriers or the covert barriers, and how do we create opportunities to enable women to either mobilise themselves or have a voice. What I've found really helpful, actually, personally for myself, as well as for some of the young people, was I think leadership programmes work really well. So even if there was a development of a leadership programme for young women or women in Kirklees, and I know that in the early part of my career, I was actually on a leadership programme and it was especially targeted at the African Caribbean community and the Pakistani community, which were the two largest ethnic minority communities in Huddersfield at the time. And it really helped me to get my head around community development and what it involves and the types of projects that were good practice projects. And that was something that my current colleague that I work with and has worked with me on a lot of my projects, Ishtiaq Ahmed, he'd pioneered with a lady called Louise Mohammed, and they were both working at Voluntary Action Kirklees at the time and ACT, the Afro-Caribbean Trust. So they came out with this wonderful leadership programme, and many of the people that were on that programme, we were talking about this the other day actually, have gone on and pioneered within their own profession. Some have moved into the fire service, some have gone into social cares. So I think there's something really valuable in actually dispensing your knowledge and your experience and what you've learnt to other people.
Yeah, it's definitely good, and it builds their confidence then as well, and they can learn different skills. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think sometimes, rather than recreating the wheel, so many people, harbour knowledge and wisdom and real lived experiences and life experiences. So I think it's so valuable that we have that exchange and that really honest conversation around that.
Yeah. So that just sort of leads on to my last question then. Would you have any advice, for other women to sort of help them feel more empowered?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of things that they can do. I'd always suggest getting yourself onto social media platforms to start with. It might feel a little bit daunting, but I found Twitter really helpful in terms of learning what is it that other women out there are doing? Like what sorts of projects go on? What are people's thoughts and ideas? And it's such a vast pool of knowledge, because sometimes it can feel really lonely when you're wanting to develop something and you're perhaps at home thinking about it, or within a set circle. But once you get yourself into the public domain, and it doesn't mean you have to necessarily engage with somebody, but use public platforms like, you know, LinkedIn, Twitter, social media, to just look at the types of projects that you're hoping to develop, or the types of interactions you're hoping to build. And I always say to young women, especially those that I still mentor, reach out to women. If you find somebody's doing something interesting, drop an email, pick up the phone, you know, send a Twitter message. Just say, look, really interested in what you're doing. Can you tell me how you got yourself into that field of work? What were some of the challenges? What's happening? So I'd suggest people reaching out to other people, but also trying to access opportunities that are available within your local area or wider. I know that's extremely difficult at the moment, but whether you're joining local groups, having important conversations and developing your confidence, to then, I've known women that have moved on further and then developed a blog, or, you know, platforms like this where they're doing Q&As with other women, or have started up new projects themselves. So I think I'd really say, you know, don't be afraid to step out there, open the doors, find out what's going on, access opportunities. And, you know, it's so wonderful, some of the connections that you can make, and actually some of the ideas that you can exchange, and the strength that you find, especially within the sisterhood as well. I'd really suggest that.
That's really good. Thank you for that. And thank you for joining me today, Sophia. It's been lovely talking to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invite, and best of luck for International Women's Day.
Thank you.